Let's review the story of aggregate demand and aggregate supply from the previous sessions. Imagine an economy as a very big market where goods and services are bought and sold. The total of everything produced and purchased in this market are called GDP. To understand how the economy works, we use two key players, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. They help us see how price levels and the amount of goods and services interact. Let's look at them one by one, starting from aggregate demand. So think of aggregate demand as total spending in the economy. It comes from four main groups: consumers, which we are going to show it with C, when people are buying things, buying goods and services like food, clothes, houses. The spending by the businesses, which are known as investments, and we are going to show it with I. All the investments by the companies in factories, equipment, or technology. Next factor that determines the aggregate demand is the spending by the government, spending on roads, schools, and defense. Plus, whatever spending that foreigners have in our country, buying and selling goods across countries, exports minus imports. These are four forms of the four main groups that determine the aggregate demand, the total spending in the economy. Now imagine prices in the economy are like a signal to the buyers. When prices drop, people feel richer, so they are going to buy more. Businesses find it cheaper to borrow money and invest, and exports become cheaper, so other countries buy more goods from our country. Each of these three uh, um, channels show the relationship between the price and the total spending. And we call it as aggregate demand, showing it with the aggregate demand curve, which is a downward sloping curve. So we have the real output down here and the prices, the level of the prices up here. And when the prices are at P1, the output, the total spending is at Y1. When the prices go down, this signals people to demand more goods and services. This negative relationship between the price and the quantity is is determined by three channels. The wealth effect, which shows the relationship between the price and the consumption of the people. When the price goes up, it signals the people that they are not as rich as before, so they spend less. And when the price goes down, they are going to spend more. The second channel that describes why there is a negative relationship between the price and the quantity is known as interest rate effect. It shows the relationship between the price and the investment by the firms and companies. Okay? When the price, for example, goes down, it signals the price, it signals the businesses to borrow more money and invest more. because the borrowing gets cheaper. When we have lower prices, the interest rate goes down, and we are going to see that businesses find it cheaper to borrow and they will invest more. So, this is another reason that we see this negative relationship between the prices and the aggregate demand. The third reason that the price and the output, the price and the demand have negative relationship goes back to the exchange rate effect, which is determined by the relationship between the prices and net exports. Exports become cheaper when the prices go down, so other countries buy more goods from our country. When any of these groups, this consumers, as C, or investors, the businesses, or the government, or the foreigners, if any of these four groups change because of the price, we are going to be moving along the curve. We are going to stay on the same curve. But if any of these four factors change, not because of the price, so the price is going to be the same, price is not going to change, but if C, I, G, and net export changes, we're going to have a new structure for the aggregate demand, and aggregate demand will shift. If either of these increase the spending, that is going to shift the aggregate demand to the right. If either of these are decreasing the aggregate demand, we are going to see a shift in the aggregate demand to the left. At any given price, we will have lower demand on the left side of this when the price is constant, but consumption, investment, government expenditure, or net export is decreasing. Okay, now let's look at the long run aggregates. So the long run aggregate supply, let's show it with LRAS. In the long run, the economy's potential output does not depend on prices. It's instead like the speed limit of production based on how many workers are available, how much equipment and tools businesses have, skills of the workforce, natural resources available, how good technology is. This is why the long run aggregate supply curve is a vertical curve. It shows the economy's maximum sustainable production. What is the potential amount of the production if you use all the resources in the economy? And this long run aggregate supply is a vertical line. It means that the output is not a factor of, is not a function of the prices. The price is not going to change the output. We earlier discussed about this, that we know it as the neutrality of the monetary neutrality. Okay, so long run aggregate supply is vertical, but it doesn't mean that we're going to have exactly the same amount of the production all the time. This could also change. As I said, it depends on the resources that we have, how much resources, the workers, the equipment, the natural resources, all of those. If any of those change, we're going to see a shift in this long run aggregate supply either to the right or to the left. Okay, so if labor, capital, human capital, natural resources, or technology changes, we are going to see a shift in the long run aggregate supply. If any of these changes in any of these factors is going to result in the shift in the long run aggregate supply. For example, if we have more immigration, that's going to shift the long run aggregate supply to the right. Or if we have better education, improving the productivity of the people, we're going to see that in the long run aggregate supply is shifting to the right. Or uh, if we lose some of the immigration, or if we just some of the natural resources um, are affected by some natural disaster, for example, we're going to have fewer resources and long run aggregate supply is going to shift to the left. Okay, we're going to look at more examples when we are going to put everything together. But for now, let's look at the short run aggregate supply. In the short run, businesses are flexible, but not completely. Prices of goods may adjust, but wages and some costs are sticky. For example, if prices go up, but wages stay the same, businesses produce more, creating an upward sloping short run aggregate supply. So, this upward slope of short run aggregate supply is because of the stickiness of the prices and wages. And we have a positive relationship between the output and the level of the prices, showing it with the short run aggregate supply. Okay. However, this curve shifts when all of these factors change. Okay. If any of these factors change, we're going to see that short run aggregate supply will shift if they are increasing the production. The short run aggregate supply will shift to the right. If any of these just change the production in a direction that the producers decide to produce less, the short run aggregate supply will shift to the left at any given price. Okay, so we will have fewer productions at any given price if any of these resources cause in a reduction in the total production. Okay, but there's also one more factor that is different from the long run aggregate supply, and that is the expected prices. Okay, if the expected prices change, if businesses think that prices will rise in the future, they may cut back production now, shifting the short run aggregate supply to the left. Okay, so these expected prices are another factor that does not affect on the long run aggregate supply, but they affect on the short run aggregate supply. And if it is expected by the businesses that the prices will increase in the future, they will cut the production, and then we will see the short run aggregate supply will shift to the left. Okay, so just think of aggregate demand, long run aggregate supply, and short run aggregate supply as three parts of a story. Aggregate demand shows how much we are spending. Long run aggregate supply shows how much we can produce at full capacity using all the resources when we are just producing exactly on the production possibilities frontier in the economy. And this is what happens in the long run. And the short-term aggregate supply tells what happens in the short term when prices or costs change. In the next part of this story, let's look at how different events like a global crisis and different situations can shift each of the aggregate demand or the aggregate supply and how they are going to affect on the economy's equilibrium. For now, remember how these three players interact, and let's look at the details further in the next recording.